everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. It's just Phil here today, so I thought I'd spend some time talking about parts of my kit I've been trying to improve over the last year or so. We talked about this topic in the past, but I thought it would be good to give you a practical look into how I critically evaluate my own gear. I look for potential ways to improve on it, and then test new items to make sure they actually fit the bill and are what I'm looking for. Today, I'll be going over two particular pieces of my own kit that I've recently tried to improve, and talk about some of the main considerations I had along the way, and the things I was really looking for. So let's get to it. First of all, before I get too far into it, choosing a new piece of gear to try is always a bit of a risk. You're likely well adjusted to the gear you're currently using, and it's possible that the new gear won't work as well for you initially. You might find certain things that came easily before seem slower, uncomfortable, or just more convoluted or complicated. The thing is, though, there's generally a reason you're trying to use a new item, right? Sometimes it's just because it's cool or fun or something like that. But if it's because something with the old item you had wasn't working for you anymore, you know exactly what it is you're trying to achieve with the new item you just picked up. I think it's important to remember that and keep it in mind as you're trying out new pieces of kit. Because on the one hand, when you spend money on a new item, it can be tempting to try and force it to work, right? To justify your purchase. On the other, if it doesn't immediately feel natural, you may find yourself wanting to switch back. Either way, it's important to give the new gear a fair shake. Practice with it at home, try it for several games, and really try to be as impartial about your observations as possible. This is what I did a few years ago when I was thinking about moving away from my JPC style plate carrier to something smaller and lighter, like a chest rig. I had been using a plate carrying style of load bearing equipment for many, many years, basically since I started playing airsoft after my first year, so like 2007 onwards. But over the years, I've found myself moving to smaller, tighter load-bearing equipment. So I had, a Cyraz, which I then moved to a 1694. And then the 1694, I took the side panels out and replaced them with the Faro Concepts elastic cummerbund. And then from there, I went from a JPC, what I've been using for the last several years. And, I was always hesitant to trying a chest rig because, number one, it provides a lot less BB protection. And also, I was extremely proficient with my plate carrier setup. That being said, I had some conversations with Chris, talked about, what I'm trying to achieve on the field, and I decided that I would buy like a really cheap reproduction chest rig, something for like $40 or something, and just try it out. So I ended up picking up something like a reproduction Haley Strategic D3CR. Now, obviously, like really crappy reproduction, but the whole idea is like it's a proof of concept. Let's just try this out and see. Do I love it? Do I hate it? Etc. And I'll tell you, right out of the gate, I felt like I had made a bad decision. It didn't feel natural at all. My reloads were way slower. The chest rig was flopping around a lot more. And, I was taking painful hits that normally would have been prevented by my JPC. I had brought the JPC with me to the games, actually, and I was really tempted to just say, nah, whatever, I'll just switch back to it. But for the purposes of what I'm trying to achieve, I decided to stick with the chest rig for a few more games. I took a bit of time sort of adjusting the straps as best as I could, as best as the cheap reproduction would let me. And anything that I couldn't adjust down, I would just tape down with electrical tape. If stuff was a little too big, I'd fold the fabric over, tape that down with electrical tape. And after a while, I started finding that my mobility was a bit better. So I could move slightly faster, tuck into the cover a little bit more, and more importantly, the chest rig didn't flop around nearly as much. I also found that I was a little less tired between games because I wasn't carrying the extra weight of the training plates I have in my JPC. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would you use training plates in airsoft? Well, firstly, they weren't full weight training plates. So, they were only about like 5 pounds each or whatever. But more importantly, having the extra weights in the plate actually made the plate carrier a lot more comfortable for me and very stable. Like it didn't feel like it was flopping around. The mags were sticking in the same position. Like it really felt like, it was being used in the way that it was intended. And fundamentally, I really didn't feel like the extra 10 pounds was slowing me down too much, right? What's an extra 10 pounds? The reality, though, and if I think about it objectively, is that the plates probably did slow me down a little bit because when I didn't have them, I noticed, that, hey, I feel a little bit faster. In any event, I kept using that chest rig for, every game that I played for that year. And as I mentioned, it was a proof of concept for me, right? So I wanted to see if I enjoyed it more with a mind to move to something a bit better quality once I had an idea of what I was looking for. I found that this chest rig in particular, allowed me to carry enough mags, but it also had a lot of spare space that I didn't use, including pistol mag pouches I couldn't remove, a bungee retention space for an extra mag that was absolutely useless to do anything with. And then some smaller pouches that were actually so small they could barely fit anything. Like they could fit a multi-tool or a battery, but not both. And really, the chest rig itself overall didn't provide as much flexibility as I wanted. So after about a year of using it, I started to look for an alternative. I did a little bit of research. I wasn't looking to spend like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So I eventually settled on a Shadow Strategic chest rig. And it actually had several nifty features that I enjoyed. For one thing, it was more fully adjustable than the previous rig, and it didn't require me taping anything down. It also had 8 mag pouches, which was up from the previous 6 on the other one. And they had these really cool like tabs that fit underneath the mag, so you could, number one, adjust the mag height, so where it actually sits in the carrier, which is neat. But you could also just pull on that tab. And when you did that, the mag would basically pop out and made it easier for you to retrieve it. It had MOLLE side panels, so I could mount exactly the pouches I wanted and not have anything extra. So I would have one, miscellaneous pouch on one side, one pouch for my radio, and that was it. And I was actually really jazzed to try it out because I hadn't really carried that many mags onto the field in a while, number one. And the rig itself felt really snug, secure, and it was extremely comfortable when I was wearing it at home and practicing some ready-ups and stuff with it. The other thing that's worth noting is that Shadow Strategic is an actual real steel manufacturer, so the build quality was super nice because it's a real steel piece of kit. It's designed for real-world uses, so I had like zero worries that it would survive any abuse that I could put it through on the airsoft field, right? If it's good enough for people in the real world, it's definitely good enough to play airsoft with. So I was really jazzed. And what I actually found when I hit the field with it was that it was too wide for me as a person, right? So I don't have a huge frame. I'm not a really tall guy, as I've said before. I'm 5'6". I'm like 160-ish something centimeters. And I'm, relatively well proportioned. So 8 mags, so 4 mags wide across my front was just way too wide, especially when I had those pockets on the side too, one for my radio, like I said, and one for the miscellaneous pouch. So having that width on me actually made it difficult for me to tuck my elbows in as far as I wanted to when I was manipulating my rifle, like in cover and stuff. And it made mounting and dismounting cover a bit trickier. I couldn't tuck in as much. And overall, I kind of felt like it was almost a plate carrier in the amount of material that I was wearing across my body. So it really wasn't doing what I was looking for either. So although I had spent a bit of money on it, it's not going to do what I need to. So it's time for me to keep looking, right? So now I'm looking at a third type of rig. This one is a TMC Microfight rig. So TMC, of course, is a airsoft tactical gear manufacturer, so the build quality is not nearly as nice as the Shadow stuff. However, it's probably going to be good enough for my airsoft purposes. And the rig itself is 3 mags wide, so it's more narrow, and it's extremely customizable. Everything is done with Velcro. So you've got wingman pouches that are Velcro, you've got a dangler that has Velcro, even the inserts are Velcro, so you can replace them, move them around, the pouches, etc. So this rig is going to give me the flexibility that I'm looking for in terms of the setup that I want. So I'm not going to carry anything on my chest rig that doesn't serve a purpose, right? Which is exactly what I want. And it's smaller, so I'll be able to tuck my elbows in the way that I want to, manipulate my rifle and so on. But at time of recording, to be honest, I haven't had a chance to play a game with it. So when I do hit the field, I'll be looking for the same types of things I've talked about so far, right? I'm going to make sure that it's got a comfortable, stable fit that doesn't impede my motion on the field. And in particular, I've actually never played with a dangler before. So it'll be important for me to pay attention to that and see, is it impeding me on the field? Is it doing what I need to? And if it doesn't, then again, I'll just remove it and play with that and see if that's better. But overall, this is how the process goes, right? You try something, you see if it does what you want it to, and then you either accept it or you move on and try something different. Now, I know this kind of sucks in a way because I'm spending money to buy kit to try, not knowing whether I'm going to like it or not. And I recognize that not everyone is able to do that. I have an airsoft budget that I've set for myself, and these rigs are fitting within that budget for the year. So it's important to budget for yourself, but the flip of that is that airsoft does have a good residual value. We've talked about this in the podcast before. So, when I look at the gear that I have that I'm not going to be using, my goal is to sell it or trade it or swap it or whatever with other players to get some of that value back. So, if I spent $40 on a chest rig and I sell it to someone for $20, well, it's only really cost me $20 to make that effort. Same thing with the Shadow Strategic rig. I got a really good deal on it, and I'll be trying to pass that on to someone else. I'm not trying to, use this to make money, although maybe some people will. But for me, it's just a matter of, okay, well, I'm going to try and get back a little bit of my investment and then use that to, to keep trying new gear until I find what I want. So just keep that in mind. You're buying stuff, but if it doesn't work, chances are you may find someone who is willing to buy it from you because it might work for them. The Shadow Strategic rig in particular is not really good for me because I'm a smaller guy, but for someone like Pat who is much larger, that might be a good fit for him. So it's just a matter of, trying stuff out and, encouraging people to try the gear and see if it works for them. And then if they like it, they can buy it from you, right? So just a quick note about that. I mentioned at the start of the episode that I'd be talking about two things. So the chest rig is one thing. The other thing I've been looking at this year is ear protection, right? And especially ear protection that has, the enhanced microphones and audio pickups and stuff like that. So I'm talking about like your Peltors, your Comtacs, your, all that kind of stuff. In particular, I have a set of Earmores, Earmore M32, I think. I managed to get a set from one of our local retailers, Rob. So shout out to him because it's an excellent piece of kit. I'll get into that in a little bit. But my point is, I wanted to look at some ear protection, because I've never rolled with it before. It's not something I've used. But I do have a fast helmet. It can mount right into it. And I wanted a better solution for my communications as well. I wanted something integrated. So I looked at what was available. And as I mentioned earlier, we have one of the local retailers for Earmore, Rob with his Section 8 Tactical Outfitters. Great guy. He's got a really cool product showroom and stuff. So I was able to connect with him and get situated with that. But bottom line, I wanted to have some tactical ear pro that I could hook into my communications, and this was a great solution. So for those of you who may not know, this type of hearing protection not only obviously protects your hearing, but more importantly, it picks up ambient noise and amplifies it, so it makes it easier to hear what's going on in your immediate environment, which is excellent. And it integrates directly into a PTT, which you can connect to your radio, and it has a microphone on the headset, which you can remove if you don't want. But using all of that gives you a turnkey solution for communications, right? We use communications a lot in our games. We've talked about it in the podcast before. It's an essential part of operating as a unit. So we wanted something strong that is robust, and these Earmores M32 really fit the bill. Again, this is real steel, real world quality stuff. So if it's good enough for the real world, it's definitely good enough for us. As a side note, it runs off AAA batteries, which is easy. They're easy to get. And if you get rechargeable batteries, then you're basically set, right? You get like 6 hours battery life or something like that. Very rock solid. Exactly what we need for airsoft. No fuss, no muss. So I got those and I put them on my helmet. Took a little bit of finagling, but no problem. And then I tried them out, brought them to a game. And the first thing I'll tell you is that everything is much clearer when you have those on. So initially it feels a little weird because you're like wearing a headset at an airsoft game. And if you've never worn one before, you're like, I'm not sure how this is going to go. But everything is crystal clear. And actually you hear everything way better. So if you're in the woods, for example, you can hear crunching around, like your own noise or the noise of other people, much clearer, which is absolutely an advantage for you. And then as well, you don't have to worry about getting shot in the ear, right? You've got that ear protection. So that's also helpful. But the thing is, and I didn't really recognize that until I hit the field, but transitioning shoulders became very challenging because the way that I tuck into my rifle when I'm shooting, the bottom portion of the hearing protection would bunch up with my chin strap and it would connect and like just block my cheek weld. And so I couldn't get a good cheek weld when I was offside. And even shooting on my strong side, it became a little odd. And I was like, okay, well, this is weird. So I took the helmet off and I looked at the way that my straps were set up for the helmet. And I realized, well, they're not ideal. So I need to move them around, reset them, resize them so it's a little bit easier. So I did all of that. But even still, after doing all of that, I recognized that, you know what, this is the cheek weld that I'm getting with this Ear Pro doesn't allow me to get on my as far down on my optic as I would normally like. So here I had a bit of an issue because I've said before, if something doesn't work for you, well, then you need to keep looking. But this particular issue, I'm like, well, if I want to be using hearing protection and I want to have the advantage of that amplified sound, I can't just ditch it. And all of them are roughly the same shape, so what am I going to do? So this is where I have to figure out, okay, well, where are my priorities and what other pieces of my kit are contributing to the issue that I'm having? And what I realized is that my rifle sight is actually quite low. It's directly on the rail. So in talking with Chris and other people on the team, I realized what I actually need to try out is a riser. Right? You put a riser on your rail and that elevates your sight by, half an inch or an inch. And then you don't have to get such a tight cheek weld on your rifle. And if I do that, I likely won't have any issue anymore with the cheek weld that I get as a result of the Ear Pro that I'm wearing. So that's the next piece, right? I have a rail coming in, a rail riser, I should say. I'm going to slap that on the gun. I'm going to put my sight on top. I'm going to sight everything in, make sure everything is nice and tight. And I'm going to give it a go. And same thing, I'm going to take, I'm going to practice, do some ready ups at home, obviously, like we always do. But then I'm going to hit the field and I'm going to see when I'm in the heat of the moment, when, I'm taking a corner, I'm coming up on target, and I bring my rifle up, what does that look like? When I transition really quickly, what does that look like? And ideally, the problem will be resolved. But the thing is, it might not be resolved. And so what am I going to do then? Well, then I need to start looking at other parts. And it may be that that particular size of hearing protection is not really compatible with the particular optic that I have or with the particular rifle setup that I have. And if I want to keep using it, I need to rejig my kit again. Now, if you've listened so far, you might think, wow, this is a lot of trial and effort, right? This is sounds like a real pain in the ass, actually, Phil. Like, why are you putting yourself through all of that, right? It's Airsoft. It's just a game. Like, just do whatever. It's fine. Well, firstly, if you've listened to any of our contact before, you know that we don't just do whatever, right? We do things with a purpose because doing that sets us up for success. But the reality is that every time we're trying a new piece of kit, like I said at the beginning, we're trying to solve problems. We're trying to make ourselves more effective on the field, perform a little bit better. And sometimes it's going to work and other times it's not going to. But what you can't do is get discouraged by stuff not working out. You need to trust the process. We know that trying stuff out, seeing how it works, adapting it to your playstyle, and most importantly, practicing with it, will either yield the results that we want and yield the benefit that we want, or it won't. And if it doesn't, you ditch it. And if it does, you keep using it, right? That's the process. And you need to trust that. And yeah, sometimes it does get frustrating because you've tried 3 different chest rigs and you're not where you want to be with it. And every time you try it, you're like, okay, well, hopefully this one's the one. Sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong. but it's important to trust the process and not get discouraged. The final thing that I'm going to leave you with, and I think this is the most important concept that we can share with anybody, is that airsoft is not a video game. And I know you're probably thinking, yeah, no shit, Phil. But think about that. In video games, and if you think about, I don't know, like any particular shooter or whatever, you unlock a new gun or an upgrade for the gun, a new sight or whatever. You just equip it and then boom, you're good to go. But it doesn't work like that in real life. Anytime you change something about your particular setup, there is an adaptation period for you that is required for you to get the maximum value out of the thing you just put on your gun or changed about your kit or whatever that is, right? So it's not just enough to go out there and buy all this new stuff. You need to practice with it. You need to put on your gear. You need to, do some ready ups, go around the house doing reloads, whatever it is that you're testing out. But you need to practice. You need to do transitions. You need to do all the things that you're going to do in a game to make sure that when you hit the field the first time with that piece of kit, it doesn't surprise you with anything. You've already gone through some of those motions. And then the second thing that you need to do is you need to actually use it in game scenarios and recognize that quite likely you are not going to be as good with this particular piece of kit as you were with the previous one that you had gotten accustomed to over the last, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, maybe years, right? Think about how I went from a single point sling to a 2-point sling. Well, I had been using a single point for like 9 years. Do you think I started using a 2-point sling and was like immediately doing all these transitions and all this kind of stuff? Like I'd been doing it forever? No, of course not. It took me a while before I got to a point where I was comfortable with it, right? So that's an absolute reality, right? Airsoft is not a video game. Upgrading your gear doesn't immediately make you better. You need to practice with it, right? You need to get accustomed to it, see how it performs, see how you perform with that gear, and keep trying until you see that improvement. And at the end of the line, you need to look back and say, am I better with whatever it is that I'm doing now than I was before I made the switch? And if the answer is yes, then you've reached the desired situation for everyone. If the answer is no, however, you either need to revert back to what you were doing previously or come up with a new solution to test, right? It's one or the other. What you shouldn't be doing if you're really concerned about your own performance and improving your own gameplay is constantly trying to use new things, new methods, new techniques, whatever, new pieces of kit that make you better than you were. And you need to do that objectively, right? Because as I said at the very beginning, it can be tempting when we spend money on stuff to say, oh yeah, this is great, this is the best thing I've ever used, when sometimes you might be lying to yourself a little bit. So hopefully this is helpful to you guys. I know it's a bit of a shorter podcast today, but I do hope you found it helpful. There's a lot to be said when it comes to gear. There's a lot of things to try. In particular, when I think about the Micro Fight Rig, that was a recommendation for us that came through the Discord. So I would highly recommend, if you're interested in these kinds of conversation, to join our Discord. The link is in the description. We have really great conversations there about everything, whether it's gear related, gameplay, game mode related, even like tech questions. We spend a lot of time talking through tech issues with people on the Discord. So if that sounds interesting to you, if you'd like to have that conversation with us, please go ahead and join us on the Discord. We'd love to have you part of our community. But until next time, that's all I've got for you this week, and we'll talk to you next time. Thank you so much for listening.